Calls for justice from the leaders of Canada and Ukraine after Iran says it unintentionally shot down a Ukrainian passenger jet, killing all 176 people on board. The Arab world's longest-serving ruler, Sultan Qaboos bin Said of Oman, has died aged 79. He took over in a bloodless coup from his father and was credited with developing the country. Taiwan's Tsai Ing-wen looks to win a second term, the self-ruled island holding presidential and parliamentary elections as its relationship to mainland China is in the spotlight. And we begin with a rare, stunning about-face by Iran. Apologies from the president and the foreign minister as state television reported that the Ukrainian plane crash in which all 176 people were killed was caused by human error. Shot down after reportedly being mistaken for a hostile target amid rising tensions with the United States. And the crash came just hours after Iran had carried out missile strikes on two air bases housing U.S. forces in Iraq. Cole Stengler has more.
3 days after the disaster, Iran's military has said its forces shot down the passenger jet bound for Ukraine, killing all 176 aboard. State media read aloud a statement from the armed forces, which said the flight, quote, got very close to a sensitive military center and resembled a hostile target, adding that the plane was hit as a result of human error. In a tweet, Iran's president offered his condolences.
The Islamic Republic of Iran deeply regrets this disastrous mistake. My thoughts and prayers go to all the mourning families. I offer my sincerest condolences.
Until now, Iran had denied that a missile was responsible for the crash, something maintained by the U.S. and Canada, whose Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that closure and accountability were needed following Iran's announcement. Meanwhile, the president of Ukraine reacted on Facebook.
We expect from Iran assurances of their readiness for a full and open investigation, bringing those responsible to justice, the return of the bodies of the dead, the payment of compensation, and official apologies through diplomatic channels.
The jetliner was hit as tensions between Washington and Tehran reached a climax after a U.S. drone strike killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani.
Meanwhile, this is not the first time such a tragedy has befallen Ukraine. Simon Ostrovsky reports from the capital, Kiev.
What's interesting about this incident is that the Iranians came around so quickly because Ukraine has a very different experience with dealing with civilian passenger jets being shot down. If you take the Malaysian Flight 17, for example, which was shot out of the sky over eastern Ukraine in 2014, most of the passengers on that flight were Dutch citizens. And so the Dutch investigation, which took over 4 years to come to its conclusions, has blamed Russia for smuggling the anti-aircraft system into eastern Ukraine in that incident. And Russia has yet to admit its involvement. So last night, when the foreign minister of Ukraine was giving a press conference on the current crisis, he said that if it was found that a missile shot down this latest Ukrainian aircraft, then he expected a long legal battle ahead. But it seems like Ukraine has avoided that scenario with Iran's latest admissions.
Earlier, the Trump administration announced a new wave of sanctions on Iran for carrying out those strikes on Iraqi bases housing U.S. troops. That announcement, made by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Treasury Steve Mnuchin. The latest round of penalties will target multiple sectors of the Islamic Republic's economy, including construction, manufacturing, textiles, and mining, as well as naming 8 top officials. The Sultan of Oman, Qaboos bin Said, has died aged 79. He was a reformer who spurred development and led his country to take on an outsized diplomatic role. Meanwhile, Omani media reporting that that man, Haytham bin Tariq Al Said, was sworn in as the new sultan. Cole Stengler takes a look back at the Arab world's longest-serving ruler.
One of the longest-serving rulers in the Middle East, Qaboos bin Said had governed Oman since 1970. after overthrowing his father in a bloodless coup. While he retained political control of the small absolute monarchy, over the decades that followed, bin Said invested heavily in Oman's infrastructure and oversaw a swath of modernizing reforms, creating a parliament and offering limited political freedoms.
The development that life in Oman has experienced, as well as the useful changes in our society, have made it necessary for us to develop the legal and judicial systems and modernize them to meet modern-day life.
Under Qaboos's watch, Oman began to play an outsized diplomatic role, cultivating friendly ties with Israel and with the United States, all the while maintaining cordial relationships with regional rivals Saudi Arabia and Iran. Though perhaps Oman's greatest diplomatic feat came in 2015, when it hosted secret talks between U.S. and Iranian diplomats. Those led to the landmark nuclear accord with Tehran.
Let's take a look now at some of the day's other stories. And political impasse continues in Tunisia. After months of negotiations, Parliament rejected the government proposed by Prime Minister-designate Habib Gemli. It's a blow to his Ennahda party, which won October's legislative poll but failed to secure a majority. The president now has 10 days to choose the next Prime Minister-designate. The French Prime Minister is due to unveil new proposals on the government's hotly contested pensions overhaul. Edouard Philippe met with union leaders on Friday. The government's hoping to quell anger to the planned reforms, but France has been hit by a record 37 days and counting of transport strikes, paralyzing the capital and other cities. After devolving 3 years ago over a financial scandal, Northern Ireland's government will return to work for the first time. The main party, Sinn Féin, and the Democratic Unionists broke the deadlock by agreeing to a power-sharing deal as outlined by the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. This Saturday, a Speaker of the Assembly and executive ministers are expected to be appointed. Taiwan's holding presidential and parliamentary elections. 2 years ago, Tsai Ing-wen's independence-leaning party suffered a stinging defeat in local polls, but she's expected to be victorious this time around. However, her challenger, Han Kuo-yu, is mayor of the island's third largest city and has been credited for energizing the Nationalist Party. Either way, it's a vote whose outcome could have a major impact on future relations with mainland China. Charles Pellegrin has more.
This elementary school in Taipei has become a polling station for the presidential and legislative elections, a chance for voters to make a choice between continuity and change, meaning whether or not to give President Tsai Ing-wen a new mandate. Most of the voters we spoke to here look back positively on the past 4 years, especially the president's hard stance on China and her economic reforms.
Tsai Ing-wen is protecting the values of Taiwan, democracy, liberty. That's all.
The government is very down to earth. They don't talk for nothing. They have done a lot of things. This government is rather stable.
She has pursued some reforms. For example, she reformed a pension system that was not adequate. Lots of governments would not dare to do this kind of reform.
The government hasn't thought through their policies enough. There are lots of people that are there that shouldn't be. They're not capable.
This neighborhood has voted for the Kuomintang since 2008. This could change by the end of the day. What's for certain is that Taiwan will have experienced its 7th consecutive free elections.
Well, weather conditions are turning slightly more favorable for fighting raging bushfires in Australia. Winds and temperatures are decreasing Saturday, even getting some rainfall, but authorities were clear that the risk was far from over. Since October, 27 people have been killed, thousands subjected to repeat evacuations. Alexander Alcott has the latest.
From the skies, the true extent of the fires becomes painfully clear. Since the beginning of the disaster, vast amounts of CO2 have been released into the atmosphere. Residents of eastern Australia have often been enveloped by a choking smog, including in Sydney, where thousands protested against the failure of politicians to deal with climate change.
We can't keep forgetting and pretending that climate change isn't real and that the planet isn't burning.
I hope this is a wake-up call for them to change the climate policy, to admit the truth that we are in a climate emergency and to try and get their emissions down to zero fast.
The massive fires have caused an ecological catastrophe in Australia, and they've even affected New Zealand, where brilliant white glaciers have turned ash brown. Though this specialist says much of the damage can be reversed.
La masse de carbone qui a été relâchée dans l'atmosphère est petite.
The carbon output is relatively small in global terms, even though it's a catastrophe locally. We can be hopeful that the bush will regrow, and the amount of carbon that's been released will be reabsorbed by the new vegetation.
Va être compensé par une masse de carbone à l'avenir équivalente restockée dans la végétation.
Meanwhile, on the ground, there's huge concern about biodiversity. 80,000 square kilometres of land have gone up in smoke, leaving an estimated 1.5 billion wild animals dead. 4 out of 5 native Australian species live in these areas, such as the koalas, that now risk extinction.
We estimate that a third of the population has been lost in the fire-affected areas. It's a knockout blow that could mean that koalas could no longer survive in the coming years.
Along the east coast, some 130 fires are still active, and around 50 of those remain out of control. Every additional hectare that burns takes an immeasurable toll.
And with hundreds of fires still burning in Australia's 2 most populous states, we will have special coverage on the crisis here on France 24, starting at 11 a.m. Paris time. Well, we are in the middle of the so-called big wave season in Nazaré, Portugal. Located on the Atlantic coast, it's become a popular tourist attraction. And while beaches there are considered to be some of the best in the whole country, the real draw are the mammoth waves, some of the biggest ever on record, easily topping 20 meters. Our reporters went to check it out.
A 24-metre wall of water, the biggest wave ever surfed. You might just be able to make out world champion Rodrigo Zoxa speeding at 80 kilometres per hour at the height of a 9-storey building.
It's the best feeling you can have. I train all my life to do that. I see God all the time, like he gave me this present, so Nazaré changed my life.
Dizzying heights that come with a risk. Surfers who fall off their boards can crash into rocks or even drown.
This is CO2, oxygen. This can save our life. You pull, make the air for you go up.
Rodrigo has used his airbag twice to get out of dangerous situations on the waves.
I tried to be deep, but the wave is just close out for me. I don't have enough speed.
10 years ago, no one dared trying to conquer Nazaré's monster waves. The Portuguese seaside town is now a hotspot for some of the world's best surfers.
I always thought, as living in Europe, that we had to go to Hawaii or America, California or Australia to surf big waves, and for me realising that the size of the waves we get here in Europe, especially here in Nazaré, that was a dream.
Nazaré's towering waves are caused by a 5-kilometre deep underwater canyon that ends just before the town's shoreline. A geological phenomenon that attracts crowds of tourists eager to see the biggest waves on the planet.
And just a reminder of our top story here on France 24 this morning about Iran's stunning about-face, saying that the Ukrainian plane crash was caused by human error. The government and military apologizing and saying it would upgrade its systems to prevent future tragedies. A statement also said those responsible for the strike on the passenger plane would be prosecuted. That's it from the newsroom. Please stay tuned to France 24.